At 9:17 a.m. on a humid morning in March 1942, a twin-engine bomber hurtled just 50 feet above the Pacific. Salt spray slapped its aluminum skin. The engines screamed. Inside the cockpit, nobody spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered had already been decided. Ahead of the aircraft, a Japanese destroyer cut through the water at over 30 knots. 2,000 tons of steel, 5-inch guns, dozens of anti-aircraft barrels already turning upward. From the bridge of that ship, the American bomber looked like a mistake. Too low, too slow, too close. And yet, it kept coming. Inside the nose of that airplane was something that should not have existed. A field cannon. A 75mm artillery gun. The same weapon used to smash concrete bunkers and light tanks. Weighing nearly 1,000 pounds, bolted inside a bomber never designed to fire forward artillery. Every engineer involved had used the same phrase: pilot suicide. They were not being dramatic. They were doing math. The recoil force of that gun was measured in tons. On the ground it buried spades into dirt. In a tank it relied on 30 tons of steel to absorb the shock. In an aircraft there was only thin aluminum rivets and lift. Fire it, the reports warned, and the nose would tear off. The aircraft would stall. The pilot could black out. The wings might fold. That was not theory. That was calculation. The man with his hand on the trigger was Flight Sergeant Alden Thorne, 28 years old, Pennsylvania coal country, enlisted pilot, not an officer, the kind of man who grew up turning wrenches in his father's garage before the draft took him. He had flown 47 missions over the past 6 months, 47 attempts to hit Japanese ships from 20,000 feet, 47 failures. Behind him, Corporal Jack Reeves stood braced against the bulkhead, 24 years old, artillery specialist from West Texas. Hands that could load a howitzer under fire in 30 seconds flat. Right now, those hands were wrapped around a 15-pound artillery shell, waiting for the moment when everything would either work or explode. Neither man had spoken in 20 minutes. Everything that mattered had already been decided. But it started 3 days earlier. March 19th. Alden landed after mission 47. 0 hits. Again. Port Moresby was a collection of tents and coral dust on the southern coast of New Guinea where nothing worked and everything rusted. In the debriefing tent, Major Kellerman made a note on his clipboard. 47 missions, 47 failures, not pilot error, system failure. The problem was simple and unsolvable. A bomb dropped from 20,000 feet took 45 seconds to fall. In 45 seconds, a destroyer moving at 30 knots could travel more than half a mile. Enough distance to make the most accurate calculation meaningless. The Japanese captains had figured this out months ago. They just watched the bomb bay doors open, started a stopwatch and turned the wheel. The bombs splashed into empty ocean. The ships kept moving. Lieutenant Daniel Patrick Sullivan had died 8 days ago when his aircraft was shot down during a high-altitude bombing run. Danny from Boston, who talked about his wife and their baby girl he had never met. The bombs missed. The destroyer got him instead. Alden had written the letter to Danny's family. His hand shook so badly he had to start over 3 times. How do you tell a woman her husband died for nothing? In his tent, Alden wrote another letter he hoped would never be sent. His younger brother Eugene was 40 miles north with the 32nd Infantry surrounded by Japanese forces, resupplied nightly by the Tokyo Express. Fast destroyer runs that American bombers could not touch. Every night those ships delivered troops ammunition and food. Every night Eugene got closer to being overrun. If Alden died testing this weapon, at least Eugene would know he tried to stop the ships. He sealed the envelope and locked it in his footlocker. Someone knocked on the tent pole. "Sergeant Thorne, General Brennan wants to see you." General Owen Brennan was not supposed to be in New Guinea. He was supposed to be in Brisbane coordinating air operations. But Brennan had a habit of showing up where the problems were. When Alden entered the briefing tent, Brennan stood next to a map with 2 other people. Dr. Harlan Whitmore, a civilian engineer in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the permanent scowl of a man who dealt in mathematics. And Lieutenant Vera Ashford, maybe 26, with dark hair pulled back and grease stains on her uniform sleeves. "Sergeant Thorne," Brennan said, "how many missions have you flown?" "47, sir." "How many hits?" "0, sir." Brennan nodded. "The high-altitude bombing campaign has a 2% hit rate. 2%. Every night the Tokyo Express runs destroyers down the coast. They deliver supplies with impunity because we cannot hit a moving ship from 20,000 feet. Your brother's unit 32nd Infantry, they are here." He pointed at the map. "Japanese forces are here. The only thing keeping your brother alive is that the Japanese supply line is stretched thin." But it gets shorter every night because we cannot stop those ships. He turned to Whitmore. Doctor! Whitmore stepped forward. He pulled a canvas tarp off something in the corner. Underneath was a field cannon, a 75mm M4. We are going to mount this inside a B-25, Brennan said. Alden stared at the gun. The barrel alone was over 6 feet long. The breech mechanism looked like it belonged in a battleship. And fire it while flying, Alden said slowly. Yes. Whitmore pushed his glasses up. The recoil force is approximately 12 tons. The forward fuselage of a B-25 is not designed to absorb that kind of shock. The structure will fail. The aircraft will enter an unrecoverable stall. The pilot will likely black out from the deceleration. He paused. It is pilot suicide. Lieutenant Ashford unrolled blueprints on the table. Dr. Whitmore's calculations are correct under standard assumptions, but we can reinforce the mounting points, redistribute the recoil force across the frame, install hydraulic dampeners, add counterweight to the tail section. Will it work? Alden asked. Ashford met his eyes. I do not know. The mathematics suggest it is possible, but we will not know until someone fires it. And if it does not work, then the pilot dies, Whitmore said. Brennan stepped forward. I am not going to lie to you, Sergeant. This is dangerous. But the alternative is that we keep dropping bombs that never hit. We keep losing aircraft while accomplishing nothing. And men like your brother keep dying because we cannot cut the enemy's supply line. This weapon can punch through the hull of a destroyer. One hit to the boiler room and that ship is dead in the water. But someone has to fly at 50 feet and pull the trigger. Alden thought about Danny Sullivan, about Eugene in the jungle, about 47 failures. I will do it, Alden said. Whitmore closed his eyes like he had just watched a man sign his own death warrant. You will need a cannoneer, Brennan said. Someone to load the shells. I want Corporal Reeves. They found Reeves in the maintenance hangar, helping replace a cylinder head. He was stripped to his undershirt, covered in grease. Reeves, Alden called. Need you to volunteer for something? Reeves looked up. What kind of something? The kind where you load artillery shells in an airplane while it is being shot at. Reeves put down his wrench and wiped his hands. How dangerous. Engineers say it is suicide. Reeves nodded slowly. When do we start? The modifications began that night. Staff Sergeant Clifford Hobbs led a team of 6 mechanics in a canvas hangar lit by worklights. The heat was suffocating. Nobody complained. They started by cutting off the B-25's glass bombardier nose. Saws screamed through aluminum and plexiglass. What remained was a gaping hole in the front of the aircraft. They fabricated a steel mounting frame welded into a cradle that would hold the breech of the gun. The frame had to absorb 12 tons of recoil force and distribute it across the aircraft structure without tearing the rivets out. Lieutenant Ashford supervised every step. She checked measurements with calipers. She recalculated stress loads on a slide rule. At 200 a.m., Hobbs discovered the first problem. Lieutenant, the gun weighs 1,047 pounds. Spec sheet said 1,000. Ashford pulled out her notebook and started calculating. That shifts the center of gravity forward by 14 inches. The aircraft will be nose-heavy. We need to add weight to the tail. They spent the next 4 hours bolting lead ballast into the tail section. 280 pounds of salvaged lead cut into blocks and secured with steel straps. Every pound was measured. Every bolt was torqued to specification. At dawn, Hobbs stood back and looked at the aircraft. The nose was gone, replaced by a blunt steel mount holding a field artillery piece. The tail sagged under added weight. It looks like hell, Hobbs said. It looks like a weapon, Ashford replied. Alden arrived as the sun came up. He walked around the aircraft slowly. The cannon jutted from the nose like a stinger. The mounting frame was raw steel, unfinished, brutal. He ran his hand along the fuselage. The aluminum was warm. Will it fly? He asked. It will fly, Ashford said. The question is whether it will survive being fired. What are the odds? She hesitated. I do not know. Dr. Whitmore's calculations show catastrophic failure, but aluminum is stronger than rated spec when cold-worked. Rivets can absorb shock loads if installed correctly. The frame may hold if the dampeners work. So maybe, she agreed. Alden climbed into the cockpit. The controls felt familiar, but there was something new. A metal ring sight bolted to the instrument panel. Crude. Simple. Just a circle with crosshairs. To aim the gun, he would have to aim the airplane. Reeves climbed in and moved to the cannon position. Barely room to stand. He practiced the loading motion. Lift shell. Insert into breech. Slam it closed. tapped the pilot's shoulder, again and again, finding the rhythm. By mid-morning, he had it down to 28 seconds. One of the mechanics had used a grease pencil to write on the inside of the fuselage just above the gun mount. If this works, we were here. If it fails, remember us. Below it, 6 signatures. Let us see if it works, Alden said. They towed the aircraft to a test range, a reinforced platform with tie-down chains bolted to concrete blocks. The target was an abandoned Japanese barge anchored 800 yards offshore, already half sunk. General Brennan was there, Whitmore looking like a man attending an execution, Ashford with her clipboard, medics waiting 200 yards away. Hobbs secured the tie-downs, thick steel chains attached to landing gear hardpoints, rated for 5 tons. If the recoil exceeded that, the aircraft would tear free. Alden climbed into the cockpit. Reeves took his position. The morning was bright and hot. Neither man spoke. Alden started the engines. The Wright Cyclones coughed, caught, and settled into a steady roar. He ran through the checklist. Everything was green. Reeves loaded the first shell, 15 pounds of hardened steel and explosive. He slid it into the breech and locked it with a heavy clunk. Then he tapped Alden's shoulder. Ready. Alden looked through the ring sight. The barge was centered, 800 yards. He thought about Danny Sullivan, about Eugene in the jungle, about 47 missions that accomplished nothing. He squeezed the trigger. For an instant the world stopped. Then it began again, but wrong. The recoil was not just violent, it was elemental. The entire aircraft lurched backward against the chains like a living thing trying to escape. The sound was not a bang. It was a physical force that hit Alden in the chest and compressed his lungs. White smoke blasted through the cockpit. The instrument panel blurred. His vision tunneled. The aircraft rocked forward, the chains screaming. Something metallic snapped. A rivet, maybe. The smell of cordite filled the air, acrid and choking. Alden blinked. His ears were ringing. His hands felt numb. "Reeves," he called. "Still here," Reeves said from behind him. Alden looked through the windscreen. 800 yards away, the barge had a massive, ragged tear where the shell had punched through and detonated inside. The barge listed hard and began to sink faster. The gun worked. The airplane was still in one piece. Outside, Hobbs was running toward the aircraft, his face pale. Whitmore had his hands on top of his head, staring. They unchained the aircraft, and Hobbs climbed up to inspect. He moved slowly, checking every rivet, every seam, every joint. After 10 minutes, he climbed down. 8 cracked rivets, 2 bent frame members, hydraulic fluid leaking from the dampener, but the structure held. Whitmore pushed his glasses up. It should not have held. But it did, Ashford said quietly. Brennan looked at Alden. "Can you fly it?" Alden thought about the sensation, the brutal deceleration, the way his vision had blurred, the feeling that the aircraft was tearing itself apart. "Yes, sir," he said. "Then we proceed to flight tests tomorrow. If the aircraft survives that, we move to combat trials." He paused. "You can still refuse." Alden thought about the letter in his footlocker, about 47 missions, about the Tokyo Express. "Respectfully, sir, I am not refusing." That night, Alden did not sleep. He lay on his cot and listened to the jungle and thought about the morning. Somewhere out there, Eugene was in a foxhole waiting for supplies that would never come unless someone stopped the ships. Tomorrow, Alden would try to stop them with a weapon that should not exist, mounted in an airplane that should not fly. The math said he would die. But the math had been wrong before, and if it was wrong again, maybe 48 would be different from 47. Maybe this time it would matter. When he woke at dawn, it was time. March 21st, 1942, 6 o'clock in the morning. Alden stood next to the B-25 and watched mechanics make final checks. Hobbs moved around the aircraft with a flashlight, inspecting every rivet they had replaced after yesterday's ground test. Lieutenant Ashford approached with her clipboard. She had not slept. "The hydraulic seals are holding," she said. "We replaced the damaged rivets with stronger alloy. The frame reinforcements should distribute the recoil load more evenly." "Should," Alden repeated. "Should," she confirmed. General Brennan arrived in a jeep. He climbed out and walked over to Alden. "You do not have to do this," Brennan said. "No, sir. You cannot find another pilot. Anyone else would be making their first flight. I already fired it once. I know what to expect." "And what do you expect?" "To feel like I flew into a wall and to survive it." Brennan studied him. Then he offered his hand. "Good hunting, Sergeant." Alden climbed into the cockpit, started the engines, ran through the checklist. Everything nominal. But the ring sight said otherwise. Reeves's voice came through the intercom. "Gun loaded. Ready when you are, Sarge." Alden looked down the runway. 3,500 feet of crushed coral. At the far end, the jungle. Beyond that, the ocean. Beyond that, a target ship the Navy had provided. An old destroyer escort too damaged to repair anchored 12 miles offshore. 12 miles to find out if the engineers were right. Alden pushed the throttles forward. The takeoff was wrong from the start. The aircraft was sluggish. The added weight made it wallow. Alden held the nose down building speed. At 85 knots he pulled back. The B-25 lifted off with all the grace of a brick learning to fly. It clawed into the air, engines screaming. Alden retracted the landing gear and banked left, heading for the coast. He leveled off at 500 feet and flew straight, getting a feel for the aircraft. The nose-heavy tendency was constant. He had to hold back pressure to keep it level. Ahead, the target ship appeared. A dark shape against grey water. No smoke, no movement, just a dead hull waiting. Alden descended to 50 feet. At 50 feet, the ocean was not a surface, it was a blur. Grey-green water rushing past at 220 miles per hour, fast enough that a single mistake would drive the aircraft into the sea with no time to recover. The target ship grew larger, 800 yards. He could see details now. Rust, peeling paint, a forward gun mount unmanned, 600 yards, individual plates of steel, rivet lines, the waterline where rust met ocean. That was the target, 400 yards. "Ready," Reeves said quietly. 300 yards. Alden centered the ring sight on the waterline. The ship filled his vision, a wall of steel rushing toward him. He thumbed the trigger. The gun fired and sound ceased to exist. Not quiet, the opposite. A noise so enormous it overwhelmed the machinery of hearing. Alden's world compressed to sensation without audio. He saw his hands thrown forward, saw the instrument panel blur, saw the water rising, but heard nothing except a high-pitched whine that filled his skull. The aircraft nosed down sharply, 5 feet above water, 3 feet. The propellers were kicking up spray. Alden grabbed the control stick and pulled back. Hard. The nose came up, 5 feet above the water. The aircraft leveled out. Barely. Alden blinked, trying to clear his vision. His chest hurt. His hands were shaking. "Reeves," he called. A groan. "Here. Hit my head. Seeing stars." Alden banked into a climbing turn, gaining altitude. His heart was pounding. Every instinct screamed to land immediately. But he had to see. He leveled off at 200 feet and looked back. There was a massive, ragged tear in the waterline. Water was flooding in. The bow was settling lower. The gun worked. The aircraft had survived, but just barely. The flight back took 15 minutes. They felt like 15 hours. Every vibration made Alden think something was about to fail. He watched the instruments obsessively waiting for one to spike or drop. The tower cleared him for landing. He brought the aircraft in smooth despite shaking hands. Wheels touched coral. He cut power. Before he could shut down the engines, Hobbs and his team were swarming the aircraft. Flashlights, wrenches, checking for cracks for failures. Alden sat in the cockpit and tried to breathe. His chest hurt. Probably a cracked rib from the straps. His vision was still blurred. His ears were ringing. Reeves climbed out, moving carefully. Blood on his forehead. He looked at Alden. "That was worse than I expected." "Yeah. Want to do it again?" Alden started laughing. Wrong, hysterical. Reeves started laughing too. They stood there next to the aircraft, laughing like madmen. It was either laugh or scream. Hobbs climbed down. His face was grim. 23 structural failures, 8 major cracks in the frame, 12 rivets sheared, hydraulic line ruptured, stress fracture in the left wing spar. He paused. "You are lucky to be alive." "Can you fix it?" Alden asked. "Fix it. Yes. Make it last." He shook his head. Lieutenant Ashford arrived. She listened to Hobbs' report, making notes. When he finished, she calculated on her slide rule. "Based on observed damage and stress loads, I estimate structural life of 14 missions maximum. After that, cumulative fatigue will exceed material endurance limit. The airframe will fail catastrophically." 14 missions, Alden repeated. "Can you repair it in 72 hours? He asked. Ashford nodded. "If we work around the clock." "Do it." That night, while Hobbs and his team stripped damaged sections and reinforced weak points, Lieutenant Ashford made her final inspection of the airframe. Her flashlight beam traced along the left wing spar. There, a hairline crack, barely visible, 3 inches long, starting at rivet hole 47. She ran her fingers along it, calculating automatically. Current length 3 inches. Estimated propagation rate under combat loads 0.7 inches per firing cycle. Structural failure threshold 12 inches. The crack would reach critical after approximately 13 shots, maybe 14. She should report this, ground the aircraft, replace the wing spar, 3 days minimum. But the combat mission was scheduled for dawn tomorrow. Intelligence said the convoy would transit Huon Gulf. If they delayed, the window would close. The ships would reach their destination. Eugene's unit would be overrun. Ashford stood in darkness. Flashlight pointed at a crack that could kill 2 men. She thought about her father, a pilot in the Great War, shot down over France. The aircraft had structural failure, a cracked spar the mechanics had missed, or maybe they had seen it and judged it acceptable. Her father died because someone made a calculation and decided the risk was worth it. Now she was making the same calculation. Report the crack, save Alden and Reeves, condemn Eugene and his unit, or say nothing. Let them fly. Trust that 13 shots was enough. She stood there for 5 minutes. Then she walked to the maintenance tent, found welding equipment, returned alone. For the next 4 hours, she worked in secret, drilling out the cracked rivet, installing a doubler plate, welding a reinforcement patch, not permanent, temporary stabilization, buying time, pushing the failure threshold from 13 shots to maybe 18, enough to complete the mission, probably. At 4 a.m. Hobbs found her finishing the weld. "Lieutenant." She turned, exhausted, streaked with metal dust. "Found a crack. Fixed it." Hobbs inspected her work. "Does the sergeant know?" "No." "You going to tell him? After he comes back?" Hobbs nodded. "Some decisions you make alone. If he doesn't come back—" "Then it was my decision that killed him," Ashford said. "And I will live with that." March 22nd. Intelligence reported a Japanese convoy. 3 destroyers escorting 2 troop transports. 7,000 men. Enough supplies for 2 months. If that convoy got through, the 32nd Infantry would be encircled within a week. Brennan briefed the mission. 2 standard B-25s with bombs, 1 gunship. "The gunship will target the destroyers," Brennan said. "Sergeant Thorne, if it becomes unsafe, abort. This is a test, not a suicide mission." Alden stood. "Respectfully, sir, if I abort, those destroyers keep sailing. And my brother dies." Brennan held his gaze. "Then do not abort." 5:30 a.m. 3 B-25s sat on the flight line engines warming. Alden performed his walk-around by flashlight. Everything looked solid. The repairs were invisible. Reeves was in position checking the gun. 6 shells loaded. "You ready?" Alden asked. "No, but I am here anyway." They took off into darkness, flew low just above treetops, using terrain to mask approach. 40 minutes over dark jungle. At 6:15, they reached the coast. Alden descended to 50 feet. The other bombers followed. They skimmed across water like predators. At 6:40, the convoy appeared. Dead ahead. 5 ships. 3 destroyers screening. 2 transports behind. The destroyers were moving fast, cutting white wakes. Their guns were manned. They were not ready for what was coming. Alden dropped even lower. 40 feet. 30. Close enough that propeller wash kicked up spray. Reeves, loaded and ready. 2,000 yards. The destroyers' guns began tracking them. 1,500 yards. Tracers reached up. Red streaks. 1,000 yards. Black flak bursts. The aircraft shuddered. Something hit the left wing. A hole appeared. 800 yards. Alden fired the nose machine guns. Tracers poured forward. Glass shattered on the bridge. Gun crews ducked. 600 yards. The destroyer filled his vision. Steel plates, rivets, rust stains, a wall of metal. Alden centered the ring sight on the waterline. He squeezed the trigger. Time fractured. The trigger pull happened in normal time. 1 second. But the recoil happened in compressed time. A full second of force delivered in 1/10 of a second. Physics asserting itself with brutal efficiency. Alden experienced it as a discontinuity. He was flying forward. Then he was not. The transition contained no middle ground. Just before and after with violence between. His vision greyed. His body compressed against the straps. The control stick was ripped from his hands. The nose dropped. But this time he was ready. He grabbed the stick as the nose dropped. Pulled back. Hard. The water rushed up. Then the nose came up and they were climbing. Behind them the destroyer lurched. The shell had hit exactly where Alden aimed. Waterline. Forward section. It punched through and detonated inside the boiler room. Steam erupted. The destroyer began to slow. White steam poured from vents. The wake thinned. A 2,000-ton warship was dying. "Hit!" Reeves shouted. But no time to celebrate. 2 destroyers remained. The sky erupted with tracers. Alden banked hard left. The aircraft groaned. Something in the frame cracked, loud enough to hear. "Load another shell!" Alden called. "Working on it." Behind them, the other B-25s made their runs. Bombs skipped across water like stones. One hit a transport amidships. Orange and black explosion, fuel igniting. Alden came around for a second pass, 400 yards, point-blank range, close enough to see faces of men firing at them. "Ready," Reeves called. Alden fired. The recoil was still brutal, still violent, but familiarity had changed his relationship with it. The first time was terror, the second time survival. Now it was just part of the process. You did not fight it, you rode it, let your body absorb the shock, trusted the straps, trusted the frame. The shell crossed the distance and hit the destroyer's magazine. The explosion was biblical, a fireball 300 feet high. Debris arced outward. The destroyer simply ceased to exist as a functional warship. "Jesus Christ," Reeves breathed. Alden pulled away. The aircraft was shaking badly, oil pressure dropping on left engine, temperature rising. "Mongoose lead, this is Mongoose 2. Convoy is breaking up. Transport's dead in water. Remaining destroyer retreating." Alden keyed the mic. "Roger, form up. We are heading home." He turned south, toward Port Moresby. If they could make it. The left engine was running rough. He would have to shut it down soon. "How bad is it back there?" Reeves moved through the aircraft. "Bad. Wing spar cracked. Can see daylight through fuselage in 3 places. Hydraulic fluid everywhere." "Can we make it back?" Silence. Then, "We better." They limped home on one engine and prayer. The coast appeared through clouds. The jungle. The coral dust airfield. Alden set up for landing. No hydraulics meant no flaps. Hot brakes. Fast touchdown. One chance. The wheels hit hard. Too hard. The left strut collapsed. The aircraft slewed sideways, scraping across coral in a shower of sparks. They came to rest 50 yards from the runway. Alden sat in the cockpit, hands on the controls, but unable to feel them. His ears were ringing. He tasted blood. "Reeves, still here, Sarge?" They sat in silence. Then Alden started laughing, the same wrong laugh. They had done it, flown into gunfire, fired a weapon that should have torn the aircraft apart, and survived. 2 destroyers dead, 1 convoy annihilated, 7,000 Japanese troops who would never reach the front. Eugene would live another day. Alden unbuckled and climbed out. His legs nearly gave out. Hobbs was there, catching him. General Brennan arrived. He looked at the damaged aircraft, at Alden, at Reeves bleeding from a dozen cuts. "Report? 2 destroyers sunk. Convoy destroyed. Mission accomplished." Brennan nodded slowly. "Washington is on the line. They want to know if this was luck or if we can do it again." Alden looked at the aircraft, at the crack in the wing, at the collapsed gear, at the weapon that had changed everything. "We can do it again," he said. "As many times as you need." Behind him the sun broke through clouds. The impossible had just become doctrine. March 1943, 1 year after the first test. The war had changed. The gunships had changed it. In the past 12 months, 47 Japanese destroyers and cruisers had been damaged or sunk by 75mm cannon fire. The Tokyo Express, once invincible, now ran only at night with heavy fighter escort. Daylight movements had ceased. Supply lines were strangled. Island garrisons starved. Japanese commanders rerouted convoys, extending voyage times, burning precious fuel, arriving late or not at all. Every adjustment carried a cost. Every delay compounded shortages. Ammunition, food, medicine. Intelligence reported a major Japanese convoy. 8 troop transports, 8 destroyer escorts, 7,000 men, enough supplies to sustain operations in New Guinea for 3 months. General Brennan assembled the largest strike force the Southwest Pacific had seen. 12 gunships, 20 conventional bombers, 30 fighters for escort. Alden stood with the other gunship pilots in the briefing tent. He was lieutenant now, promoted in the field. He knew most of these pilots, had trained them, had watched some die when the aircraft failed or the enemy got lucky. The attrition rate was 30%, acceptable in the cold mathematics of war. Brennan pointed at the map. "The convoy will transit the Dampier Strait at dawn. Poor weather expected. Cloud cover below 500 feet, visibility under 2 miles. Conditions favor low-altitude attack." He looked at Alden. "Lieutenant Thorne will lead the gunship element. Your objective is the destroyer screen. Kill the escorts first. Without protection, the transports are helpless." Alden nodded. He had flown this mission 100 times in his head. "Expect heavy resistance," Brennan continued. "Veteran crews. They know what the gunships can do. They will be ready." He paused. "We have one advantage. They are expecting us from altitude. They are not expecting us from the waves." March 3rd, 1943, 4:30 a.m. The flight line was controlled chaos. 12 gunships, 84 men, all committed to a single objective. Alden walked the line, checking each aircraft. Hobbs had worked miracles. Every gunship reinforced, upgraded, improved. The modifications that kept Alden alive were now standard. He stopped at his own aircraft. The name painted on the nose was simple. Eugene, his brother, the reason he flew. Eugene had written last month. Short, to the point. Alden found out what you have been doing. You saved my unit. That convoy you stopped in March 42. We were surrounded, out of ammunition. When that convoy did not arrive, the Japanese offensive stalled. We got resupplied. We held. You saved my life and never told me. Come home safe. Eugene Alden kept the letter in his flight suit pocket. A reminder of why the impossible was necessary. Reeves climbed onto the wing. 6 shells loaded. Hydraulics checked. Frame looks solid.
How many missions on this airframe? 18. 5 more before they hit the structural limit. Alden climbed into the cockpit. The routine was automatic now. Start sequence. Gauges. Controls. The radio crackled. All Mongoose elements, this is Mongoose lead. Weather confirms low cloud cover. Visibility 2 miles. Convoy on schedule. Time over target 0615. 90 minutes. Mongoose elements start engines. One by one, the Wright Cyclones coughed to life. The sound built, multiplied. 12 bombers, 24 engines, 33,600 horsepower. Enough power to change the war. They took off in trail. 12 aircraft climbing into darkness. Alden kept low just above jungle canopy. Behind him the others followed, a line of predators hunting. The flight took 70 minutes. Navigation by compass and dead reckoning. At 6 o'clock the sky began to lighten. The clouds hung at 400 feet. Thick. Perfect.
Alden descended to 50 feet. Behind him, 11 aircraft dropped to wave height. At 6:10, they broke through a gap. The convoy was dead ahead. 8 transports in 2 columns. 8 destroyers screening. 16 ships carrying the future of the Japanese campaign. Alden keyed the mic. Mongoose elements, targets in sight. Execute attack plan. Destroyers first. The formation split. 4 gunships per flight, each targeting a different destroyer. Alden picked the lead destroyer, the command ship. Kill the head, the body follows. Reeves, ready, 1,200 yards. The destroyer spotted them. Alarms sounded. Gun crews scrambled. 1,000 yards. Tracers reached up. The sky filled with flak. 800 yards. Alden fired nose guns. 50 caliber rounds hammered the superstructure. Glass shattered. Men dove for cover. 600 yards. The ship filled his vision. He could see the captain on the bridge, could see fear on his face. Alden aimed at the waterline, at the place where a shell could reach something vital. He fired. The recoil was still brutal, still violent, but familiarity had changed his relationship with it. The first time was terror. Now it was just part of the process, like turbulence, like flak. You did not fight it. You rode it, let your body absorb the shock, trusted the straps, trusted the frame, trusted that the mathematics of repeated stress had not reached critical yet. The shell crossed the distance in under a second. Impact. The destroyer shuddered. Secondary explosions followed. The ship began listing immediately. Alden pulled away. Behind him, 3 more gunships making their runs. 3 more destroyers taking fire. The ocean erupted with explosions. 1 destroyer exploded. Magazine gone. Ship breaking in half. Another lost power. Dead in the water. Crew abandoning ship. A third was burning. Listing hard. Minutes from sinking. The destroyer screen was collapsing. Mongoose lead. This is Mongoose 4. 3 destroyers down. 4 damaged. Remaining escorts breaking off. Alden banked around. The transports were exposed. Helpless. Conventional bombers were making their runs. Skip bombs skipped across water, hit hulls, detonated. 1 transport exploded, fuel and ammunition together. The fireball was massive. Another was sinking, bow underwater, men jumping from deck. A third burned from bow to stern. The massacre lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, the Dampier Strait was a graveyard. 8 transports sunk or sinking, 4 destroyers destroyed, 3 damaged beyond repair, 7,000 Japanese troops in the water. Most would not survive. 7,000 troops who would never reach the front. 3 months of supplies on the ocean floor. A Japanese offensive that would never happen because the logistics to support it no longer existed. Alden turned for home. His hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped months ago. You could get used to anything. All 12 gunships flying, all would make it home. Acceptable losses, 0. June 1944. 15 months after Bismarck Sea. The gunship program was being phased out. New technology had arrived. Rockets, air-to-ground missiles, lighter, more flexible, easier to use. The 75mm cannon, once revolutionary, was now obsolete. Alden stood in the hangar and watched mechanics dismantle Eugene, the aircraft that had carried him through 23 combat missions. The machine that should have killed him but kept flying. The cannon sat on a workbench like a relic. Around it, evidence of what it had done. Stress cracks, bent steel, sheared rivets. The aircraft had been dying slowly, mission by mission. Hobbs walked over. He looked older, greyer. "She gave us everything she had," Hobbs said. "Yeah," Alden agreed. "What will you do now?" "Stateside, training command, teaching new pilots." "You going to tell them about this?" "I am going to tell them that the math is not always right. That sometimes you have to try the impossible because the alternative is losing slowly." Alden flew home in late June. At the San Francisco airport, Eugene waited. Thinner, harder, but alive. They shook hands, a firm grip, an understanding between men who had seen things civilians could not comprehend. "You look good," Eugene said. "You look alive." Eugene smiled. "Because of you. Because you stopped those ships." They walked out into California sunshine, into a world still at war but moving toward peace. Germany was collapsing, Japan being pushed back. The end was coming. Alden thought about the letter in his footlocker, the one he had written before the first test flight. If he did not come back, it was because he was trying to fix something broken. He had fixed it. For a little while. Until something better came along. That was how wars were won. Not through perfection, through constant improvement, through willingness to try dangerous things when safe things stopped working. February 1979. Alden was 68, retired, living in Pennsylvania coal country where he grew up. The war was 34 years past, long enough that it felt like it happened to someone else. But the Air Force had called, wanted him to speak at the academy, guest lecture. Young cadets studying innovation in warfare. He stood in front of 200 cadets, young faces, eager, optimistic. "In 1942, he began, every expert said mounting a field artillery piece in a bomber was pilot suicide. They had calculations, stress analyses, mathematical proof that the aircraft would tear apart. They were right. The math was absolutely correct." He paused. "We did it anyway." He told them the story, not sanitized, the real one, about fear and doubt, and the moment before you pull the trigger when you are certain you are about to die. About the sensation of the aircraft stopping in mid-air. About watching the wings flex and wondering if this was when they would fold. About Reeves who loaded shells while bleeding. About Hobbs who worked 72 hours straight. About Ashford who recalculated stress loads after every mission and told them exactly how many flights they had left. About Eugene alive in the jungle because a weapon that should not exist worked long enough to change the strategic calculus. When he finished, a cadet raised her hand. "Sir, were the engineers wrong?" Alden thought about Whitmore, about his calculations, about the stress reports that predicted catastrophic failure. "No," Alden said. "The engineers were right. The math was right. We should have died. The aircraft should have failed. Everything they predicted would happen did happen. Cracks, failures, structural damage. We lost aircraft. We lost crews." He paused. "But we also sank 47 ships. We stopped convoys. We saved lives. The engineers were right about the risk. We were right about the necessity. Both things were true." Another cadet. "How did you decide the risk was worth it?" Alden pulled out his wallet. Inside was a photograph, yellowed, creased. 4 people, his mother, his father, Eugene, himself, taken in 1940 before the war. "My brother was in the infantry. He was going to die if we did not stop the supply ships. The math said I would die if we tried. I chose to risk my life instead of accepting his death." The auditorium was silent. "You will all face that choice someday. Not the same choice, but the same type. You will have a problem. The experts will tell you it cannot be solved. The math will prove they are right, and you will have to decide whether to accept that answer or try anyway." He looked at the faces in front of him, young, untempered. "If you accept the impossible, you guarantee failure. If you try the impossible, you might fail anyway, but you also might succeed. And sometimes the difference between defeat and victory is just the willingness to try when everyone else has given up." He picked up his notes. The lecture was over, But one final thought occurred to him. The engineers who said it could not be done were not cowards. They were not wrong. They were doing their job, protecting us from recklessness. We need engineers like that. We need people who will tell us the truth about risk. But we also need pilots who will fly anyway, who will accept that risk. Both are necessary. Neither is sufficient alone. He looked at them one last time. The lesson is not that you should ignore experts. The lesson is that expertise tells you what is probable, not what is possible. The space between those two things is where wars are won. He left the stage to applause, walked out into Colorado sunshine, an old man now, slow, grey, but still carrying the memory of that morning in March 1942 when he climbed into an aircraft that should not fly and pulled a trigger that should have killed him. The math had been right about the risk. He had been right about the necessity. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. Behind him, the cadets filed out, talking, debating. Some would remember, most would forget, but a few would face their own impossible moments, and maybe they would remember the story of the weapon that should not have worked, the aircraft that should not have flown, the men who did it anyway because the alternative was unacceptable. Alden walked to his car. He had a flight back to Pennsylvania in 3 hours, back to quiet retirement, back to a world where the war was history and the impossible was just a story. But for him, it would always be real. The sound of the gun, the shudder of the aircraft, the moment when physics and necessity collided and somehow impossibly necessity won. He got in his car and drove away. Behind him, the academy gleamed white in mountain sun, training the next generation, preparing them for wars not yet imagined, teaching them doctrine not yet written. Somewhere in that building, someone would face an impossible problem, would be told it could not be solved, would have to choose between accepting failure and attempting the unthinkable. And maybe they would remember. The engineers were right about the math, but the math was not the only answer. Sometimes the only way forward was to aim everything you had at the thing you could not kill and pull the trigger anyway. That was the lesson of the 75mm cannon. That was the legacy of the impossible gun. It had not changed the world, it had just changed the war. And sometimes that was enough.